In spite of what you may have been told, making functional pottery need not be expensive or difficult. Our ancestors made all the pots they needed for cooking and for serving food from just tools and materials they found out in nature. Easy. And although their methods have been largely forgotten today, we can still make pottery the way they did, simply and easily. In this video, I'm going to take you through the whole process of making a functional set of dishes using just materials I collect out in nature. Simple, easy, and effective. So the first thing we need for this project is to locate some clay out in nature. That's relatively simple no matter where you live, because clay is actually one of the most abundant minerals on Earth. If you live in a damp climate, clay is easy to recognize by its plastic-like clay texture. But if you live in a dry climate like I do, it might be a little harder. In that case, we're looking for this crackled texture. This tells us that the material here is expansive. That is, it expands when it gets wet, it contracts when it gets dry, causing those crackles. That usually indicates that the material here has a large percentage of clay in it. Mindat.org is a good resource for searching for clay in your area. You can just go there, type in here clay. Over here, the location, you can put in Arizona, or you can be more specific by county or something like that. And you can find old clay quarries all over the world using this resource. So go there and check that out. But then you're also going to need to know a little bit about land ownership. Depending on where that clay quarry is located, if it's on private land, you need to get permission from the owner. On public land, you might have to check out what the laws are. Out here in the western United States where I live, there's a lot of Bureau of Land Management and Forest Service land. And in those cases, you're usually allowed to collect a small amount of minerals for personal use. But you just want to make sure you're not disrupting the natural environment. You're not digging down in a meadow. You're not tearing up tree roots, those kind of things. So usually in those cases, I'm collecting it from like an old quarry or like a cut bank of a stream or a road cut. Those are good places where you can take some without really damaging the natural environment. So you might need to call the land ownership agency in your area to find out what the laws are where you live. So I'm just going to collect a little bit of this, take it home, and then I'll show you how I process this dry clay into a material usable for making pottery. Okay, so I've collected my clay and I've got it home. Now how do I turn this coarse material into a fine plastic material suitable for making pottery? If the clay you've collected is relatively pure, then you can dry process it. And that just means getting it dry, grinding it up, and then mixing in a little bit of sand and wetting it. And so that's what I'm going to do because this material is pretty pure clay. Now the way this was done traditionally in the Americas was with what's called a metate. This is just a grinding stone used for grinding corn or clay or all kinds of things up into a powder. So this works really good. If you don't have access to a metate, they do sell these online, but you don't necessarily have to have this grinding stone. You can just take a rock or a brick and grind it up right on the surface of a driveway or a sidewalk. So that works pretty good too. If you want to save some labor though, you can get one of these corn grinders. This little cast iron Mexican corn grinder makes short work of turning this natural clay into a powder that I can then wet and turn into the plastic clay material for making pottery. Just load up the hopper on top, turn the crank for a little while, and you have what you're looking for, powdered clay. A metate on Amazon will cost you around $100. I have no idea what the shipping would be because those things are pretty heavy, it's a stone. Whereas this corn grinder on Amazon will cost you less than $50, so about half the price and about half the labor. I will put links down in the doobly-doo to where you can find more information on where to buy these products, as well as a link to how to wet process clay. That is, if your clay has too much impurities in it, that removes some of those impurities so then you can start using it for making pottery. So in this video, I'm only showing you dry processing. If you need wet processing, that link will be in the doobly-doo as well. At this stage in the process, we add sand to the clay. Now I know that might seem counterintuitive, especially since we've already talked about removing impurities such as sand from the clay. But here's the thing. The clay by itself is too dense. It's too dense for that water to leave and let the pottery dry evenly. What would happen naturally if it was pure clay was that water would leave the outside of the clay and it would stay deeply embedded on the inside of the clay, and the pot would crack. Just like those crackles we see in the bottoms of mud puddles, that's what that's caused by, is the uneven drying of clay. And so by adding about 20% sand or some other non-plastic material to the clay, we allow it to open up and let that water leave and enter the clay in a more even fashion. This will keep the pottery from cracking when it dries, and it will protect it from thermal shock in the firing. Every clay is different. Every clay requires maybe a little more or less sand or some other, as I said, non-plastic material added to it. 20% is a good place to start with most clays. Now I scooped out of my bucket 8 or just about 8 scoops of this powdered processed clay. 20% means I need 2 scoops of sifted fine sand. My plan is to make 2 plates and 2 bowls, and I think this is enough clay to do it with. But if it turns out that I need more clay, I can always go back and mix more because the recipe is simple, right? I've still got more of that natural clay in my bucket, so if I need more, I can grind more. Then it's just 4 scoops of clay to 1 scoop of sand. 4-to-1 ratio is 20%, and so I can always mix up more and it will be exactly the same. So the other thing about mixing up clay is it's not at its most plastic, it's most workable when it's first mixed up. So I'm going to wrap this up in a plastic bag and let it sit for about 24 hours before I use it. And during that time, the water will creep down into all those little clay particles and kind of lubricate them so that it's at its most plastic, or at least quite a bit more plastic than it is now. So I'm going to wrap this up in a plastic bag and I'll come back and start working on that pottery tomorrow. If you've watched a few of my videos, then you know I usually make pottery using the coil method. So this will be a little different. I'll make this bowl using a real simple slab method. Now I went down to the Dollar Tree and I got myself this inexpensive bowl that is just the size I need. When you're picking out a bowl for this, always remember that your clay is going to shrink a little bit. So I'm just going to form this slab and then just pinch those walls up until it's the right size to slide down inside of the bowl. Once I get it down in there, then I can use my gourd scraper. You can see that there, made out of a gourd, just to smooth the inside and kind of press that clay into the bowl as a mold for the shape. Having just pulled this out of the mold, the clay is still very wet, and so the pot is pretty delicate. So I'm going to scrape the outside a little bit, try to get rid of some of those creases from the wrinkles in the fabric, but I'm also being very gentle with it, and I'm going to let it dry and kind of firm up a little bit before I get too physical with it. So now I need to make another bowl, just like I did the first one. If you feel like you're getting value from this video, please give it a like. I work really hard to make pottery accessible to people, to teach how to make pottery without all the complex and expensive equipment that's commonly used to make pottery nowadays. And in doing that, for a video like this, I have to gloss over a lot of the details. Otherwise, this video would be like 2 hours long, and a lot of people wouldn't watch a video like that. If you're curious about those details, things like how to find clay in nature, how to process that clay, hand-forming pottery, or how to fire pottery without a kiln, then check out the other videos on my channel. I have lots of videos covering those details in depth. Also, go to my website, ancientpottery.how. There you're going to find online classes, articles, and tools and materials you won't find anywhere else. Things like pookies, gourd scrapers, and smectite clay slips. I'll drop a link to my website down in the doobly-doo. Now with 2 bowls completed, it's time to get started on the plates. Again, I'm just starting out by patting out a slab. And in this case, because it's a plate, there's not much more to it. This bowl I've picked because it's the diameter I want, so I'm going to use that as a template. Unfortunately, I didn't pat out the slab quite as big as I needed for my circle, and so I'm going to add a little piece of clay here just so I have enough. And now that my slab is big enough, I'm ready to start cutting my circle. Now I'm going to roll and attach a small coil of clay around the edge to make a little lip on the plate. And now I'm just going to use that wet gourd scraper to smooth off that edge where the coil was attached to the slab. And here I am just closing that little gap between the outside edge of the coil and the slab. And as I did with the bowls, I need to make a second plate just like I did the first. Okay, now that the second plate is done, I'm going to go back to that first bowl I made. It's been setting and drying all this time, and now it's firmed up to the point that I can kind of finish it up. So I'm just smoothing the outside good, and then I'm using the knife to kind of take off any excess clay around the rim, and now I'm going to smooth the rim, finish that off with a little scrap of wet buckskin, and then I'll be ready to set that bowl aside and let it dry. And of course, I finished up the second bowl in exactly the same manner, but I won't bother showing you that. Now back to the plates, which also, at this point, have had time to sit and dry and firm up. I'm just using my knife to cut off a little angle at the bottom edge of the plate, and then I'll flip it upside down and use that credit card that I've been using to scrape to just round that off to give it a nice rounded bottom and make it look and feel real nice. Okay, I got the pots all formed and pretty well smooth. I'm pretty much done for today. I need to let them sit here upside down and dry for a few more hours. At some point tonight, I'll come out, I'll wrap them up in plastic so they don't dry too much overnight. And then tomorrow I'll come out here and I'll polish them, make them nice and smooth and even so they have a nice feel in your hand, and that will also make them less porous. And then after that, I can just let them dry fully before I take them out and fire them. So I made a little mistake here today. I came out here this morning and unwrapped these because they were wrapped up overnight. And when I did, I turned these bowls right side up, thinking I would let them dry a little bit this way, and then I'd come back in a few minutes and turn them over. And the reason is the rims will dry too fast if they're left drying upright. And so I went back in the house thinking I'll be back in 15 or 20 minutes. Well, a couple hours later, I thought, oh no, the pots. And you can see by the color here that the rims are quite a bit drier than the rest. So it's drying very unevenly, which is not what you want. So now I'm going to get started on this smoothing, but I just wanted to show you how you can tell that it's drying unevenly because of the colors and how that's potentially a bad thing that can cause rim cracks. All right, I've come back out in the country to fire my pots this time. I'm just gonna fire them with a simple campfire sort of arrangement, which is all you really need to fire pottery. In order to turn most clay into ceramic material, you only need to get it up to around 700 to 750 degrees Celsius, which, is a high temperature. It's much hotter than your stove gets in your house. But for a campfire, easily attainable. Today I brought out a couple of special tools for me to use. One is this bucket. Found this at a craft store, and I just drilled some holes around the top to let air circulate through. And I'm gonna use this to keep the fuel off of the pottery. If the wood sits right up against the pottery, it'll cause dark spots called fire clouds, which sometimes are desirable. In this case, I'd rather not have them, and so this will help keep the wood off the pottery. The other thing I brought out today is this hunk of beeswax. This is a ½ pound of pure Rocky Mountain beeswax, or at least according to the label, it is. I bought this at the Tucson Gem Show last month, and I'm going to use this to seal my pots. So in the kind of temperatures we're getting in this firing, 750 degrees Celsius, those are great for turning it into ceramic. They're not so great at like melting glaze or getting that pottery to vitrify. So it's going to be very porous when we're done. It's going to be a type of pottery that's called earthenware or terracotta. So it's going to be porous, and we don't want it to necessarily absorb the juices from our food, and then they'll start to spoil inside of the pot. And so in order to seal it, I'm going to use this beeswax. So that's the plan today. Fire the pot, seal it with beeswax, and then I'll go home and we'll eat off of it. So there were a couple problems with this pottery that you didn't see, and that is that the clay kind of wanted to crack. So both of the plates, as they dried, developed rather deep cracks along the edges. And so I tried to fix that as best I could by taking wet clay and kind of pressing it down into those cracks and letting it dry. And so they're mostly gone, but there's also kind of a coarse area on the pot. You can see where that stone smooth surface kind of gets interrupted, where it's coarse and kind of rough right there. And that's where I filled those cracks. And I didn't want to get too aggressive in trying to smooth that afterward, because I didn't want to make the cracks worse. And so I just left it rough, hoping it won't crack more in the firing, which is a possibility, but chances are it'll come through okay. We'll see. The other thing is there's a small superficial crack in the bottom of one of the bowls. And so probably this clay needed more temper. Now, I've used this clay before, and I've used the same amount of temper, but I want to stress that every clay is different, and I dug this in a slightly different location. Therefore, it may be a little different than what I'm used to. And so probably if I use this again, I'd add more temper to it. For now, I'm just going to try to go ahead. Hopefully those plates don't get worse in the firing, and the beeswax will help seal any of those superficial cracks. Here you can see a classic example of what happens when the fire starts on one side and the wind blows it that way. This is the downwind side. The fire was blowing it this way. This side burned hottest and first. Almost all burned to coals on this side. Now, as I get around the other side, you'll see that some of this wood still isn't fully burning yet. This is the upwind side right here. See? Still burning. And that's what happens. That's what the wind did. So we're just going to go ahead and let it burn out the way it wants to. Well, one of the plates broke real good. Right on the crack too. In fact, I don't even see the bits of it. They've got to be there somewhere. The handle's burned right off of that thing. Crazy. We'll let that cool a little bit before we start breaking it up. If you let it cool too quickly, it can crack. So I'm gonna let it sit and cool like that before I start pulling them out. But they look okay other than that one that broke. There's the missing piece right there. Okay. Oh, that bowl broke. I think it might have been an exploding rock, because there's a rock in there that seemed to have had some issues, and I think it was setting on it. That bowl looks good though. We've got one good bowl and one good plate. That wax will melt real fast. I gotta make this plate level, or I'm afraid the wax will just slide right off of it. This one has a crack in the rim. Doggone it. I'm gonna try, if we're cooling off, to get the sides sealed as well. Even if you've got little cracks, it's okay if you get it sealed good. Then your soup or whatever you're eating isn't going anywhere. Give it a good final seal in the bottom. Make sure that crack is filled, and then drop the rest in there. And hey, that bee seems interested in my pottery. Not cool. Turned out to be a great little project. I just wish that other plate and bowl hadn't broken. My original intention was that I would have 2 plates and 2 bowls, and my wife and I could enjoy dinner together on this last scene, but it just didn't work out that way. But perhaps that's good. Perhaps that helps you manage expectations, because when you're doing projects like this, you're trying wild clay that maybe you've never tried before, and you're firing outdoors. Things do sometimes go wrong, and so maybe that you won't be so disappointed if it don't work out the first time you try this. But you definitely should try this. It's a great way to make something yourself and then actually be able to use it for something. So I'm going to continue to use this plate and this bowl throughout the week, eating, then washing, drying, eating again, and I'm going to see how they hold up. And I'm going to make a video about that next week. That will be for my Polychrome level channel members and Patreons only. So if you're interested in that deeper dive, a little more about the making of this and what went wrong, but also a lot more about the use and how they hold up over time, go become a channel member or Patreon at the Polychrome level, and you can see that video. In the meantime, I made another video similar to this last year, where I went all the way from dirt through making a mug and then using that mug at the end. And I will link that up right over here. So go watch that, and I'll catch you next time. Thanks for watching.